So in Annapolis, when that little conference fails, we have Alexander Hamilton telling us we need a convention of all of the states as a constitutional convention. I'm Walter Isaacson of the Aspen Institute, and I'm here with Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Joe Ellis. Professor Ellis, tell us, what does Madison want and what does Hamilton want when they call this convention?
Little Jimmy Madison, who signs himself at this time James Madison Jr. He signs as junior until he's 50 years old. He's a little guy. He's 5'2", about 120 pounds. But he is all mind and no matter, if you will. He has been thinking about what they ought to do in Philadelphia at the convention, reading David Hume, reading the European histories, and he has concluded that not just revision of the Articles is necessary, but replacement, a radical change.
And what he mainly objects to is the fact that there are all these separate states and he wants one national government?
He wants sovereignty to reside at the federal rather than the state level.
That's a coup. That's not exactly what they were supposed to be doing, right?
It's a violation, or let's say it's an enlargement of their mandate.
Because they were just called together to figure out tariffs and taxes, right?
That's what most people thought, that they would probably say that they would find some way to cooperate in terms of treaties or mercantile things. Although how they were going to pass taxes, I don't know how they would have done that within the confines of the state system. But everybody expected some kind of reform instead of some kind of radical replacement.
But there you got Madison saying we need to be radical here. We need to replace the entire Articles with a centralizing. Where did they gather? Philadelphia.
When they got to Philadelphia, the Virginia delegation was there about 15 days before there was a quorum. There were heavy storms in New England. Virtually none of the New England states got represented in the first month of the convention. In that time, when the Virginia delegation was there, but no business was being done by the full Constitutional Convention, they caucused at several taverns. The City Tavern is the big one. And they brought in a few other like-minded nationalists. John Wilson in Pennsylvania, and Gouverneur Morris, also from Pennsylvania.
So these are the people who wanted to do something really radical, which is create a national
government. The radicals
government.
Gathered and caucused.
So they got together first, and they were pre-cooking this game.
That's exactly what they did.
How did they communicate with each other? They obviously didn't have email, so...
That's actually a hard question for me to answer. Once they got to Philadelphia, they just all sat down and drank wine together.
Now, one of the interesting things is when they finally do decide to meet in a real full-fledged convention, they get most of the states represented there, they use the exact same building and the exact same room of the Declaration of Independence, right?
I think that should not be overlooked, and it often is. Namely, that when you visit that place, you're visiting both the place where the Declaration of Independence was written and where the Constitution was
written. It was called
the
State House then, but now called Independence Hall in
Right,
Philadelphia.
but it's also making a statement about the continuity between the two founding moments. 76 when we declare independence, 87 when we declare nationhood.
And so they were consciously saying, let's do it in the same place where we did the Declaration of Independence so it doesn't look like we're doing something radically different.
I think that's
continuing.
I think that was, whether that was the original reason, it certainly was a reason. Another reason was it's a central location. More people can get to it more easily than any other place. It's accessible by water, blah, blah, blah.
Now tell me the main issue of a national government versus what we had, which was a confederation. How does Madison define what we need to do to change that?
Madison thought that in order for that to work, two things had to happen. That there should be a bicameral legislature. The Articles was a single house legislature, but both of the houses needed to be elected proportionally.
In other words, they were representing the people, not the separate states.
Correct. That's why proportional representation says it's operating on the people and not on the states.
That's what we now have in the House of Representatives.
Not quite, no.
But it's
we have it in the House of Representatives,
right.
Yes, but we don't have it in the Senate, and we'll get to that.
Right.
But the other thing he wants is a federal veto of all state legislation.
Wow, that really makes it a national government.
It does.
And we don't have that even today necessarily.
That one was what they call dead on arrival.
And so a lot of these things, basically you have this radical caucus that presents the Virginia plan, which is Madison.
The Virginia plan then dominates the agenda and sets the agenda for the whole Congress.
But it's not fully adopted. We ended up compromising on the issue of national and federal. Is that right?
That's correct. They dominate, the radicals, the nationalists dominate the agenda. However, a procedural decision is made with no opposition that the voting in the convention will be by state.
So in other words, that forces compromise because each of the smaller states in particular can say, we don't like this.
They can block it.
And then you end up, in some ways, compromising on the question, are we one national nation, government, or are we a collection of states? Does sovereignty reside with the national government, or are there states' rights and sovereignty resides with the states? And in the end, because of this thing you talked about, which is each state has a vote, we end up compromising on that, right? It's ambiguous.
They were forced into the compromise. Madison, if he had gotten what he wanted, namely proportional representation in both houses and a federal veto, the document would have never been ratified.
So all throughout our history, we have lived with this tension of states' rights versus the national central government's rights. Was that a good thing or a bad thing that we kind of left it ambiguous?
I think in the end it was a good thing. I think that it creates a situation in which a Republican form of government with a Democratic base confronts separate issues and allows the arguments about state or federal authority to occur in specific contexts. Now, there's one rather large occasion where that doesn't work, and we call that the Civil War. But we are still the oldest enduring republic in world history, and the stability that's made possible by this willingness to argue and the built-in ambiguity. Well, initially, Madison thought this ambiguity was horrible. When he left Philadelphia in September of '87, he was all upset. He failed. He wrote letters to Jefferson. It was a failure. It won't last more than 13 months. And then he starts to realize, when he starts to write some of the Federalist Papers, oh my God, if I'd gotten my way, it wouldn't have worked. And what we've discovered is a wholly new idea, multiple sovereignties.
And it did work not just for 13 years, but for more than 2 centuries.
Absolutely.
Thank you.